All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 344 of the Health Detective Podcast. We just move right along, right? Can't believe we're about halfway to 400. I got to think of something special for that. I feel like I let you guys down on 300, so 400 will be massive, I promise. This week is interesting because we've never really had a guest involved in two consecutive podcasts, but it's going to be quite different. You're going to learn a lot, probably some overlapping stuff, but it's actually going to be overall quite different. So you'll see our guest Neil today, and then you'll also see him tomorrow. I'll tease that a little bit more at the end, but it'll make sense once we get to the end of this. And before we jump into anything today and the very interesting topic that we're going to get into, something or some part of it is what you'd expect in our health space. And then another part's a little interesting for those maybe a bit more tough-minded and really trying to push the body and see what it can do, which Neil and I were talking off air. I do think is worth promoting for a variety of reasons. And again, we'll get into that as well. But before we start, I just want to shout out our friends at North Star Grounding. This was John Haggerty. He was on about 2 months ago, and he created these grounding products for while you sleep. So they are grounding sheets, grounding pillowcases. My wife and I have now been using them for 2 months. And I told you guys the exact same thing that I told him. I will never ever promote anything on here in a false way. I will never act like it was better than it is. So the reason I'm wording it this way is because he said, I'll send you something for free. And I said, that's awesome. And I appreciate that. But just because you send it to me for free doesn't mean I'm going to say it's the best thing in the world unless it is. So my honest to God review of it after 2 months is, one, I was very impressed how relaxing it feels now to get in bed. My wife noticed that as well. So could be placebo, but I think that's pretty cool. And there's studies actually showing that when you ground or earth, so even just go stand outside with bare feet, subjective stress does go down. That's actually on PubMed. You can go check that out. Anyway, so not only did it help with that, I did see objective boosts in my readiness score on my Oura Ring, for whatever that's worth for you guys. And at this point, 2 months in, I do notice improved sleep quality. I don't think this is something that has overall changed my life 10 to 15% because I've been doing this stuff for so long. But I'm very impressed. And considering it's not like I have to do anything extra in my life, even if it was a 1% to 2% difference in my health, that to me is kind of a no-brainer. In addition, I know, and you know, that grounding is obviously beneficial, even if I can't feel all of the benefits. And I went from probably, unfortunately, grounding on average maybe 10 minutes a week, if I'm lucky, to now a third of my life because of sleep. So I'll take that trade-off any day. So you can find those guys at northstargrounding.com, code HDP, like Health Detective Podcast, HDP15 at checkout. And all of the profits from that company go to funding their nonprofit, which allows cancer survivors who have dealt with their cancer in natural ways to create video testimonials for your friends, for your family members that are suffering with specific cancers at zero cost to us. So I'm just like, you guys have the perfect business model or what? Like, this is like literally amazing. So check those guys out. Let's get into this today with our guest, Neil. I'm going to talk about his journey and then more of a specific bio. So he has 20 years as a tech executive, 12 with Google specifically, leading teams to build, scale, and distribute products used by billions of people. Personal health journey is him from metabolically unhealthy and overweight to active father and ultra endurance athlete. I'm always fascinated by the people who do this. Now, a bit more specific here, his motivation for all of this came from the pain of realization that he could not be the active and fun father he aspired to be. In parallel, far too many family and close friends were suffering from chronic diseases, including autoimmune issues, cancer, bipolar, depression, and more. Reading and researching led him to the stunning realization that metabolic health is the root cause of all chronic diseases. What a concept, right? It's always amazing when we get into this. We're like, we can do something about this. This, coupled with the fact that 88% of people are metabolically unhealthy and 60% of normal weight people, made him realize the true magnitude of the problem. A head versus heart battle ensued, whether to stay in tech or move into the health space, until he had an epiphany/searing moment of clarity. He has always found crazy goals bring true focus and perspective. That is the truth. So a new mission was born. He wants to help 1 billion plus people become metabolically healthy. And Neil, we hope you achieve that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Evan. Appreciate you having me. And that was a very good summary. Really looking forward to our discussion.
Cool. So I want to talk first about your personal journey, and then we'll talk about the insane thing that you are pursuing now. Fun, insane. So the first question I always start with for everyone on the show is, when did your health symptoms begin and what did they look like? I know we did just mention some of the conditions that you dealt with, but sometimes there's a difference between that and the epiphany moment and the first time we're really starting to feel stuff. So if you remember, what was that like, and what were you experiencing?
Yeah, sure. So I would say I've had kind of health journey is one continuum thing, but I would say two very specific instances that happened. The first was back in 2013 at my daughter's christening, when I was 260 pounds and overweight, very unfit. My symptoms back then, I would say, weren't specific. I was definitely pre-diabetic, potentially even worse, and I was on the fast track to an early grave. But it was my daughter's christening in Belgium, a beautiful summer's day, having some beers, some food with the family, trying to kick a football around with kids, and after 30 seconds, having to sit down and take a breather because I couldn't even play a simple game of football. And it was kind of that moment of realization that sport was always a big part of my childhood upbringing, that I couldn't be the active father that I wanted to be, kind of gave me that true moment of pain and motivation, for change. And so that really was, I would say, kind of the seminal moment. I made a promise to my daughter that I wanted to be, an active father. And that led me on, I would say, on the start of my health journey, which then evolved over the next 10 years. And so I just started, running and exercising, being much more careful about what I put in my body. And then one thing led to another. I started, kind of trying to run every day. The first 6 months were totally painful and terrible. I would have these like 15-minute conversations to kick myself out of bed to actually go and do something, because your body doesn't want to, your mind wants to, and ultimately that promise helped me every morning get up and kind of do something. So I just started running, and before I knew it, I then signed up to a sprint triathlon. And I did that and just absolutely loved it. And then that led to the slippery slope of me ultimately doing, I would say, kind of ultra endurance things. So I would say that's more of my health journey. But I would say layered in through this has been the impact on family and friends through various conditions. So through that, I love testing and experimenting on myself. So I've tried pretty much every single diet under the sun. I've tried all these different kind of approaches to try and minimize inflammation and those sorts of things across that health journey. So that's been a full, I would say, 11 years now. The second health journey really has been this year, actually. And so since the decision to leave the tech world and go into health and wellness, created a kind of I untapped this energy source within inside me that was just kind of insanely prolific and almost addictive, where I would kind of wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and just be ready to go. And I would have this energy. I tried to get back to sleep. I knew how important sleep was, but I kind of couldn't get back to sleep. And so I would then get up, I would start reading, researching as I was pivoting into the health and wellness space. And I know how important sleep is. I thought that would last for a few days and my body would realize it wasn't sustainable. But it ended up lasting for 2.5 months. At the same time, I was training for the Boston Marathon. So I have had this chronic sleep deprivation, but insane energy. I was still able to execute some of my training runs, but I could feel something wasn't right. And I eventually got my blood labs tested when I just knew something wasn't right. And I effectively, through that, had burnt through any testosterone that I had. So my testosterones were at kind of chronically low levels. So this was back at the end of March. So I've since then been on a journey. So I pulled out of the Boston Marathon and really kind of focused on myself. And I would say that's been the second health journey, which maybe actually is more difficult than the first. And it's given me a lot of empathy of what it's like to really kind of battle against your body and your biology and your hormones. And so that's been a really interesting journey the last 3-4 months to try and turn that around.
Well, thanks for the transparency too, just letting us know that you're still on. Well, it's not still. It's just, hey, here's a different journey, right? And I think that's realistic. I've been on many journeys while hosting this podcast. I've been on many journeys since becoming an FDN. That's what happens. What we want to really look at is over time. Are we better each year than we were last year? And generally speaking, that's true for me. It sounds like generally speaking, that's true for you. So that's good.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back just to the beginning of the story, only because I love these little moments that come up in our lives where you worded it as an epiphany moment in your bio. I've called them aha moments before, where you're just like, bam, it's something that seems so simple on the outside, just a football game, American soccer, right? Just something so small, but because of your emotional connection to your kid, obviously, it's life changing. And so I wanted to just know what, because you said that you were interested in exercise before. So what led to you even getting to that spot where maybe you were interested in this at one point, maybe not ultra endurance, but fit enough person to not being able to play soccer or football for even 30 seconds? Like, how did that happen? Was it getting into career, just high stress? What was going on?
Yeah, good question. So it was career and travel, I would say, probably the two things that were the main impact. So at the time I was living in Dubai, I was traveling pretty much every single week, if not multiple cities, throughout that week. So I was traveling every week, different time zones. My body just didn't have kind of a natural clock. And with that, then mixed with bad food choices of not realizing, how damaging a lot of the food choices that I was making. It was just an accumulation of that. And I always had good intent, so I would take my gym kit in my suitcase, with me. But ultimately, I was so busy and prioritizing, work, that my gym kit would never leave the suitcase. So I would always, come back with it clean. So it was more just, I would, yeah, just kind of over time. And obviously, I then just got bigger and bigger and kind of heavier and heavier. But to your point, I think it's when you have the moment mixed with the emotion and that combination of the two, and the realization that of having that kind of right reason to change. But really, it was just life in 20s that really was kind of, yeah, led me down that path that I went down.
Well, thanks. And I won't, obviously, there's way more to this story that's juicy. I won't spend too much time on it. It's just the reason I've become fascinated with that is because that's very simple in a sense, right? It's like what's easy to do is easy not to do. It's these little things in life that came up that allowed you to get to that spot. And I shattered my foot, broke my foot at around 21. And it was just so off after that. It didn't allow me to run or do intense cardiovascular activity for almost several years afterwards. Now,
Mm.
after that, then it became, well, I'm out of the habit of doing this. And before I'd play drop in basketball 3 times a week for 2 hours straight. Like I never got nauseous while working out. I was never, I could push myself for hours and literally feel fine doing that. And it was insane because again, when I started again, I was mid 20s. It's not like I'm old, but I could not believe the difference between trying to do all that stuff in my mid 20s, coming back from years, it's still not being overweight, from years of not doing this though, versus just carrying it on from my childhood and never having stopped. I finally understood. It was almost instant. I'm like, oh, that's how people, in their 40s and 50s get out of shape and never get back into it. Because I've only been off for a few years. I'm not overweight. And this sucks. Like you said, that first 6 months is awful. Like I don't
Yeah.
feel good. This is not fun. Everyone's like, oh, you're supposed to feel better after you exercise. That was not happening to me when I
Yeah.
got back into this. So it's incredibly demotivating. So the lesson for people is, start today and start slow so that this doesn't get any worse. And if you haven't stopped, my gosh, make sure you don't, right? At least keep up with something because it is way harder to get back into this than anything else. That's really the tough part is when you're years off. So thanks for humoring me there. Moving more into this metabolic health side, obviously you sound like a very smart guy, judging by your bio and the accomplishments. I feel like people just living in Dubai are smart. It's a very well ran place. So anytime I hear someone like that, they're usually doing something cool in life. So I'd love to just kind of get this conversation going deeper by saying, what are some of the things that you've discovered about why so many freaking people are metabolically unhealthy? What are some of the main culprits that are killing all of us?
Yeah, certainly. So the way I look at it, I think there's five, I would say, kind of main pillars that make up metabolic health. So you have nutrition, you have movement, you have sleep, you have stress management, and then you have environment and toxins. And I think they're really the five kind of major components. And it can be different for everyone. But I think for me, and it was my downfall back in my 20s, it really is, I think, the nutrition and the food landscape. When you look at the fact that over 75% of all of the products in the supermarket have added sugar or high fructose corn syrup or something in there. Sugar is a huge driver of metabolic dysfunction, fructose specifically. So I think the whole food kind of environment is set up against us, and that's kind of then dovetailed with really, the pharmacological kind of side of things, which is very focused on, solving specific symptoms and really doesn't look at the root cause. And I think the combination of both of those two is a big part of metabolic dysfunction. And then really the other three are just layered into, we're living very out of tune with our evolutionary biology. So our current environment, the stresses we have, technology is an amazing thing. At the same time, it's exposing our biology, which hasn't changed a huge amount because it's amazingly complex in the last 50,000 years. So the combination of those two things, our bodies have never been more stressed from poor quality food, nutrition, toxins, as well as, the stress. And I think the combination of those things just really impacts the mitochondria, our body's ability to make energy efficiently. And then the body just goes into, kind of self-preservation mode, which is, how do I store as much energy, because I have this stressed environment and I need to store energy because our biology still thinks that food scarcity is probably, as well as tigers, are the two things that, that will kill us as a species. And so that's really, I would say, the kind of the different areas and how I look at it. But I certainly think that, nutrition and food is a huge part of the challenge.
And let's dive deeper into that, because you mentioned when we were talking or answering the first question, you talked about how you've tried all these different diets. I think that's a very common experience for those of us that get into this holistic space. And I am admittedly more interested in talking to people like yourself who have been doing this for many, many years, because here's the problem. And I'm not promoting or dissing one diet or another, but if you go away from the standard Western diet and you become a vegan, or you go to paleo, or you go to carnivore, or like me, my first experiment, Neil, actually was not a diet. It was just switching everything to organic. That was what I came up with. I said, I'm going to eat the
Yep.
same stuff I'm eating, but if it's Oreos, now it's organic Oreos from the store, which, while I'm not recommending, is still less toxic burden, certainly, than a normal Oreo. All these things work to some level because it was such a bad place to be starting eating the normal Western diet that you could do almost anything and feel good. But I'm curious about the people in it long term. So, what have you concluded so far after years of doing this?
So I 100% agree with everything you just said. Yeah, it kind of anything is better than the sad diet, standard American diet or standard Western diet. So I think for me, I've come to that I think you can make any, I would say, I don't believe in that. You can make any diet work, be it carnivore, be it, vegan, you can make all of them work. So I like to think of it higher level than that. And I think for me, the biggest thing is focus really on the macronutrients and, carbohydrates, fats and proteins. And within that, just understand that our bodies, need a mixture of all of those. And actually, big part of metabolic health is over reliance on carbohydrates. So sugar certainly, but even a lot of the starchy grain kind of foods, even the natural ones, have only been in our food ecosystem for a relatively short period of time. So if you go back 50,000 years, we weren't eating potatoes and rice on a daily basis. So I think for me, the element, the kind of principle is look at the macros, and the more you can err towards lower carbohydrate, the better. And if you can try and aim for the ultimate North Star is metabolic flexibility. So, our bodies have two predominant fuel sources, the carbohydrate pathway and the ketone or the kind of free fatty acid pathway. And our bodies are like hybrid cars. So the gas side really is the carbohydrate side and the ketone side is the electric side. And ideally, you want your body to be able to utilize both of those, energy sources. But the more you constantly put gasoline in your car, the more your car relies on that. And actually, our bodies don't switch across and utilize, this other pathway. So I think that is where ultimately I would love everybody to be. But I think back to, you framed it really well. Everybody just needs to start on their journey, and it's a constant journey because we change, our environments change, the foods we have change. So I think it's committing to the journey, and there is no kind of one template that works for everyone for the rest of your life. It's a constant evolving thing. So choose somewhere to start. For you, it was organic. For everyone, it's a different place. Commit to the journey and just commit to becoming more of a CEO and the owner of your own health taken interest, which is, I'm sure we'll come to the challenge in a minute, which is one of the things the challenge is really kind of out there to, yeah, hopefully make people realize that our bodies have these two fuel sources, and we can survive really kind of off both of the fuel sources, but one of them ends up in a much healthier state. I would say the other one leads to a lot of metabolic dysfunction and chronic disease. And not many people, I would say, know about these two different fuel sources and the metabolic pathways. And so hopefully the challenge that we're doing is that will raise awareness for people to, kind of take note a little bit of that.
Yeah, and we will get to the challenge probably after this one additional question, because I think there's going to be so much learning just through telling the challenge anyway. One thing I wanted to say in your kind of pillars here of what's really leading to this metabolic health, I wanted to talk about nutrition, because that's one that everyone has kind of a different opinion on, which we promote on the show. I want people to think for themselves, and you're actually promoting that directly too. You talked about being your own CEO. There's things that are relevant for different situations. There's things that are relevant for different times. For right now, like the carbohydrate thing, people will argue this tooth and nail, but the bottom line is this: carbohydrates, specifically like vegetables and stuff, they are cleansing of the environment. So they absorb toxins. And then the problem is our soil's crappier than ever before. So you have these things that absorb toxins and are less nutrient dense. And so we're not saying that maybe 1,000 years ago you couldn't have handled more, but the problem is many people do feel like crap on them, especially excess amounts. And it's like, well, duh, you're getting less nutrients from them than you ever have in history, period. And you're getting more toxins from them than you ever have in history, period. So obviously you feel bad. But then it's like, am I talking to someone like myself who currently lives in Pennsylvania? Or am I talking to someone who lives in Italy? I would imagine they can probably get away with much more carbohydrates out there. They have some very strict regulations on the toxins that are and aren't allowed. Many places in Europe are actually really interesting with it. So with that said, my one other question before the challenge is kind of to hear some of your opinions or findings on the toxins specifically. It can almost become overwhelming for people. There's glyphosate, there's thousands of chemicals being introduced each year. So what is your approach now, especially if toxins do contribute to this metabolic health issue? What is your approach now to dealing with these thousands of toxins that we're exposed to on a daily basis, kind of?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I think that's another challenging part of the puzzle. So I think the first thing is understanding that, yeah, there are just a lot more toxins in the environment, understanding, your environment, where it comes from, food, certainly water. I can share a personal experience of a very recent one, actually, water and drinking the tap water in Houston in our zip code. We put a reverse osmosis system in after we did some testing and saw that there were just crazy amounts of toxins, even just within the tap water source, which is something that, you consider to be, kind of okay. So I think the approach here is challenging. So the first thing is, try to, eat as, clean and as organic as you can. Try to, pick foods that are, as natural as possible. But I also think that this is an area where supplementation and help with, specific toxin management. I'm a big fan of, I would say, traditional kind of Chinese medicine and looking at herbal remedies which have been used throughout the ages to help naturally bring balance to the body. And I think maybe to answer your question and underlying all of this is, if you are not feeling like your normal self, then commit to getting some testing. You would never drive a car without, kind of indications of how fast you're going and where your fuel kind of tank is, gauges, and all of the other indicators within a car. So back to a lot of, kind of what you and the FDN stand for is get some testing to understand that, figure out how, kind of where your problem areas are, and then try to find a functional medicine specialist to help work through that in as natural a way as you can as a first approach. But it is, I would say, the toxic kind of environment is really difficult, challenging, and it's ever changing. So I think just being aware and knowing that kind of you have those different pillars and approaches to overcome it, I think is important.
Well, shouting out functional medicine practitioners, I can't argue that one. So, all right, we'll move to the challenge here. And please feel free to answer this as long as you'd like, because I'm sure there's a lot that went into this. What is the challenge? Why the heck are you doing this? And then, let's talk about what even inspired something like this. I'd love to know more.
Yeah, sure. So the challenge is called Zero-Two-Lomond. So it's going to be 0 calories, two brothers, myself and my younger brother. swimming Loch Lomond, which is a loch or a lake in Scotland, which is 22 miles or 36 kilometers. And so on the face of it, some might say sounds, pretty crazy. And really the reason why we're doing the challenge is to raise awareness and raise donations for, mental health, metabolic therapy, and chronic disease kind of causes, and really to make people realize that we have these, as we spoke about earlier, these two different, kind of fuel sources that our bodies can fuel on. And if you train and adapt the body, actually you don't need carbohydrates. They are the only non-essential macronutrient. We can't survive without fat, healthy fats. We can't survive without protein, but we can actually, survive without carbohydrates. So the purpose is just to demonstrate that our bodies can do amazing things if you train them. We have kind of that pathway available, and actually back to the kind of the root cause of metabolic health and our mitochondria specifically, they actually malfunction when they're too overloaded with glucose, with carbohydrates, with toxins, with fructose, and they stop working properly, and ultimately the mitochondria make up 10% of our overall body weight, and they power every single cell within our bodies. And so they work best when they can utilize both of these fuel sources, but most people just think that we need carbohydrates to fuel endurance activity, whereas the reality is our bodies will also happily run off fats and ketones as a fuel source. So it really is to raise awareness of all of that. We can dig into a little bit more of the details, and I can also share how the challenge kind of came about, because that's a fun story in its own right. But it's really to help raise awareness and for people to realize that our bodies have this metabolic flexibility, and it can help with managing and reversing anything from depression to bipolar to the chronic diseases as well.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about the inspiration for it because, when I think of a challenge, I think of something that, running a mile, maybe doing the first triathlon, things that other people have done before. Now, I might just be ignorant because I'm in America. Maybe people do this stuff in the UK, specifically Scotland, but is this a normal thing for people to want to swim this, regardless of whether or not they have a bunch of calories or yeah, let's just talk about how in general. I'd love to know why this specifically.
Wider specifically. So I would say it is a normal thing. So swimming Loch Lomond, it's the largest loch in Scotland, certainly in terms of surface area, maybe not length, but it's just I mean, Scotland's a beautiful country, but Loch Lomond is a beautiful part of Scotland. So it's relatively common that people want to swim Loch Lomond. Swimming it without taking on any calories, I don't think has been attempted before. So that is the twist that we're putting on it. And how this came about was really my younger brother. So, his story was he was suffering from pretty severe depression. This was probably back in 2016, 2017. And he was working through that and kind of realizing where it came from and trying to figure out, tools that helped him. And we were just on a family holiday in the Lake District. I was training for a triathlon. My older brother also was training for a triathlon at the time. So we were going out and swimming in the lake. And my older brother just said to Dave, my younger brother, look, do you want to come for a swim? And Dave said, oh, I'm not too sure. So I ended up lending my wetsuit. He went for a swim, and that swim was just transformative for him. So he effectively kind of just came out from that swim, felt like he had, a new brain. And for the next day, he was just, his depression, I wouldn't say it had gone, but he just felt materially different. So I think a mixture of the exercise, the cold water, being in nature, so that sparked for him a love of outdoor swimming. So he's then kind of gone on to swim Lake Windermere, which is the longest lake in England. He's also done other ultra endurance stuff. So that kind of helped him understand the importance of exercise, nutrition, and he now has much more tools in his box to help kind of manage through his mental health challenges. And so he decided to swim Loch Lomond because it's a loch that he'd always wanted to swim. And then he asked me if I wanted to to join him, knowing that I've done my own ultra endurance stuff in the past. And this just happened to coincide with me switching into the metabolic health world. And then I just thought, Dave, are you interested to do it with a twist, which is with the 0 calories to help, demonstrate the ability of our bodies to utilize fat as a fuel source? And so that's kind of how it came about, ended up being Loch Lomond. And then the name Zero-Two-Lomond actually was inspired. I got connected since we decided to do the challenge with Dr. Ian Lake, who's a doctor in the UK. And he did something equally crazy, I think, back in 2019, which was called 0-5-100. So 0 calories, 5 days, 100 miles. And he is a type 1 diabetic. And he did this, I think, with 7 others, of which I think 6 of the 7 were type 1 diabetics. So they effectively, kind of jogged 100 miles over 5 days as type 1 diabetics, and, all completed that as a similar demonstration that the body can utilize fat as a fuel source. When I spoke with Dr. Lake and he was sharing all of this, that inspired us to then name our Zero-Two-Lomond, to really also highlight the also perceived crazy challenge that he and his team did back in 2019.
Okay, side note before I forget, if you don't mind, could you please get us connected somehow after the podcast, if they do podcasts, because I've always been fascinated by people who have kind of, I'll use the word healed type 1 diabetes. I don't know that that's what you're suggesting, but to be able to do what he did means that there must be enormous progress in that diagnosis. So let's not forget that, please. Thank you.
Happy to.
And then I am not an ultra endurance athlete. I am an athletic person, but I like pickleball. That's what I do. I do some martial arts. That's what I do, not running hundreds of miles. So I almost feel silly for asking this, but you said Loch Lomond is 22 miles. Is that correct?
Yep, 22 miles, 36 kilometers. Yeah.
Okay, so is 22 miles swimming? Is that something us humans we have now achieved doing in one burst, or do you have to stop on land and then you get back in and keep doing it? Do you do that in one shot?
Yeah, good question. So we're going to do it in one shot. So we're not going to touch the land at all, but we'll have a safety boat with us, with water and electrolytes. So also to answer, thanks, Coach Debbie, for your question. So the only thing that we'll be consuming during the swim is water and electrolytes. So we won't be taking any ketone shots, any exogenous ketones, during the swim. Really, just to demonstrate that just water and electrolytes are all that you need to support that. I appreciate you've asked about essentially amino acids as well. So not for the actual day of the challenge, but as part of training for this, then part of that taking. So I use perfect amino essential amino acids as part of fasted training to help, kind of minimize any potential muscle loss that some of the literature and research says can happen if you do too much fasted training. But on the day it will be just water and electrolytes. So we're going to do it basically in one shot. We'll probably stop every maybe 60 to 90 minutes just to take on water and electrolytes, and then we'll carry on, and hopefully we don't finish when it's too dark.
Neil, you and Debbie Potts, who just asked the question, you got to get connected. She's actually an FDN, but she hosts the Low Carb Athlete podcast. And I don't think this could be any more perfect, right? This is about as good as it gets. So,
Perfect.
I'll get you guys connected afterwards too. We'll do a little exchange there. And I'm sorry, because I actually looking at something else from the comment side. You said there was research showing something about fasted training. I do not want to miss that. Would you mind repeating that for me? What was the research warning about?
Yeah, so some of the research into fasted training is that the body can start to utilize and break down muscle, effectively, as well as fat. And so one of the protective measures to limit that is to take, effectively just amino acids. So then the body effectively kind of, it sort of helps buffer. You can utilize that kind of amino acid, and it helps protect muscle. So we'll use that as part of training, but not specifically on challenge day, because we're trying to keep challenge day as pure as possible. Just to be just water and electrolytes, because then there can't be any argument that, if you're taking exogenous ketones or if you're taking amino acids. So we really want to be, for it to be as natural as possible, hence the water and electrolytes, but also obviously safe, because we do need water and electrolytes. They're kind of, key, obviously, fundamentals that we need.
Yeah, and shout out to essential amino acids though, because if you guys get that as a supplement, Listen, fasting is fasting. There's a little bit of a difference, but if you are doing intermittent fasting and include things like EAAs in your training, I've had so many people, my aunt, my one friend that were starting that, having a little trouble. They added that in. They're like, oh my gosh. So again, that's not the same as nothing, but you're still getting a ton of benefits, and your workouts are going to feel fantastic. So it's really cool. Now, I'm still astounded that a human being can last in the water this long. Because again, regardless of whether or not you guys, I hope to God you achieve this with what you're trying to do. It's an insane feat, like you said. Maybe it's never even been attempted before. I would wager too that it probably hasn't been. The fact that people are doing this with any amount of fuel is still remarkable to me, because swimming is probably one of the most tiring physical activities that we can do. You know, I can go out right now and I can spend hours outside doing moderate physical activity or whatever. I could even do boxing for an hour. But if you really said to me, Ev, you got to go swim and you got to swim as far as you can, I don't think it'd be pretty. I am sure it would not be 22 miles. How long is this expected to take? And do you have to go back and forth from, actually doing some type of swimming stroke to like resting? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say, thankfully, both my brother and I, blessed with, we did a lot of swimming when we were younger to a pretty good level. So a lot of swimming really is about technique. So we both have pretty decent swim technique. So then on top of that, it really is, can you train the body to be able to do, swim for that long and the endurance for that long? And so that's, and in terms of kind of how we're planning on doing it, really is probably swim for an hour, 90 minutes, and then take a water and electrolyte break. Not too much for, of a rest, I would say. Just a few minutes, and then carry on, because there's also an element that once you get into the rhythm of it, then again you can almost get into the zone, into the kind of that trance-like state. Although much of this will be dependent on the Scottish weather conditions, because it could be chucking it down with rain, it could be howling a gale. We have kind of got a 2-3 day window to hopefully try and find at least the best weather day. But the Scottish weather can be interesting. But much of it, like anything, when I started my original, I ran 500. I couldn't run more than 500 meters back in 2013 when I was 260 pounds, and I had to stop.
That's incredible.
And for me, and I, even at the time, I never thought or dreamed about doing something, like an Ironman, which I went on to do. You just keep, as your body kind of adapts and evolves and you train, then your body adapts to that, and then you can gradually add more and more things on. So both of us have done ultra endurance things. My brother's probably done longer swimming things than I've done, but he has done some kind of ultra runs and so forth. I've done a couple of full Ironmans, and some pretty, I would say, high-end kind of marathon side of things. So much of it is putting the time in at the gym, really, in the pool, and obviously kind of outdoors, just to get the body prepared for it. But the only final thing I would say is, like with a lot of these challenges, if you have that base foundation, which I think both of us have, then a lot of the game really is just kind of mental in your head of setting that challenge, knowing that your kind of body can do it. And it's definitely going to be challenging, especially the second half of it. But just having that kind of mental grit and determination and focus to see it through.
When you're doing this, because obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, people might not realize this. So, guys, we're used to talking about like cold plunges on this show, but I mean, any water that is below your body temperature, given enough time, will induce hypothermia. If you're in 75, 80 degree water, that's still below, and it takes a long time, but it can happen. So, I'm wondering, what is the estimated water temperature, and are you guys going to be basically required to wear wetsuits to do this? I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the water temperature, we'll wait and see. It should be somewhere around, 16 degrees. I still work in Celsius. I'm not sure what
That's
that
okay.
is
I'll figure that out while you answer it.
you can figure that out in Fahrenheit. But yeah, look, we will be wearing wetsuits, just because it is pretty cold, and given the nature of what we're trying to do, I would say to add no wetsuits on top of that, maybe that's something that we decide if we complete this challenge. Maybe that's next year's challenge is, hey, let's do it without a wetsuit. But I live in Houston, so already kind of training for this is an interesting challenge for me, because obviously finding kind of colder temperatures to do even open water swims in is pretty challenging in the summer. But yeah, we will be wearing kind of wetsuits as part of it, and depending on how cold it is, potentially a bit more insulation around the hands and feet, because for us, just being comfortable to swim is the most important thing. And even with that, it's still hopefully a pretty interesting feat in its own right, but it probably will be pretty cold.
So I did the conversion for our friends out there. So 16 degrees Celsius is about 6D degrees Fahrenheit. And a starter cold plunge, if you were new to it, you'd probably do around 55 to 60 degrees. So the average human can go about an hour in 55-degree water before hypothermia sets in. So if you do that swim at that temperature, that's on like Wim Hof level at that point. You guys are going to be breaking some Guinness World Records. So please get back on the show if that happens. I'm not suggesting it. I do have a question I'd like to ask, and I hope, because we don't know each other that well, so I'd hope just my tone over the last 40 minutes, it's always clear that when I ask a question that might be a little challenging, it's always meant with respect and for all of us to learn.
Mm.
I am someone mentally who is so attracted to the ultra endurance type of stuff. I love these types of things. I like battling my mind. I like the two voices in there, and I don't mean in the psychotic way, guys. I mean like the part that tells you to quit, and then you're kind of fighting that. I think there's something so necessary for all of us as humans to develop that at some point in our life, because it really can make or break us. With that said, there are very clear studies showing that marathon runners, just average marathon runners, I mean, their life expectancy is in the late 50s. You know, they're dying actually significantly earlier than even people who are metabolically unhealthy. And this ultra endurance thing is on a whole different level. I don't know if there's any studies on this yet. I think the ultra endurance movement, if we can call it that, I think is fairly, relatively speaking, it's fairly new. We don't have enough people going out and doing this yet over decades to see what this is going to be like. So again, this is meant with respect and genuine curiosity. For someone like you that got into this for health purposes, right? You didn't get into this to be David Goggins. I don't think David Goggins gives a crap if he dies out there running in the mountains. And there's a virtue in that. Like, God bless the guy, right? It is inspiring to see what he does. But clearly you did this for functional longevity. You want to be around for your kid. You want to be able to do these things. So may I ask, are you ever worried about the flip side of this, where the activity becomes so high that yes, you are incredibly functional, more than 99.99% of people, but perhaps it's affecting longevity? Have you thought about that? And what do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great question. So for me, I think you need to maybe tease apart some of the I would say the ultra endurance stuff, which is actually why this swim I think is so important with how you fuel that. And I'm not recommending that what we're doing for the swim is what everybody should do,
Sure.
but I think certainly many of the I would say athletes that have performed on the high end in ultra endurance that end up having health complications, it usually is because of metabolic dysfunction, because of the high amount of carbohydrates and sugars that they have taken to fuel that. And I think you made the point at the start, 60% of normal weight people can be metabolically unhealthy. So you can be an athlete and be, training that way. But if you're really only relying on carbohydrates as your fuel source, that can lead to significant health problems down the road. So what I believe, which is metabolic flexibility, is the sweet spot where I would wish everybody in the world to be, where you can utilize both of these, fuel sources. I do think if you do that, then ultra endurance things, are possible and feasible. I think we as humans were designed to do, long runs and more of the endurance stuff, but low intensities. So if you're an Ironman chasing cone, if you're, Killian Jornet, that is obviously pushing our bodies to the extreme. But I think within that, we as humans are designed to do these kind of, lower intensity, longer distant things. And I think if you have that metabolic flexibility to be able to utilize both fuel sources, I think you can do that with much less inflammation. I think you can do that with a much cleaner energy source, because you don't get a lot of the the carbohydrate pathway. You get a lot of reactive oxygen species, which creates a lot of chaos and kind of dysfunction within the cell. Whereas the ketone pathway is a much cleaner burning fuel. So I think with that you can do ultra endurance things, but I do think the nutrition side of things is one of the main things that if you over rely on carbohydrates, that leads to often health challenges when you get into your 30s, 40s, 50s.
That's an excellent point. I didn't even consider that, because I think This could be totally off, but because maybe I just have a bubble of people that I follow on social media, I would. It almost seems to me like people that are into this, the ultra endurance stuff. Not everyone, of course, and certainly not on the level that you're at. But it almost seems like there's this kind of merging between the biohacking stuff and people interested in that. And I would not say that that's as present in the marathon community. Like even someone like my mom, who I love to death, and she's into health now, but she would never consider this type of stuff that we're talking about. I could picture her shooting for something like a marathon. She's done half marathons in her life, but yes, you're right. That would be fueled totally through carbohydrates and stuff. Really interesting and great answer. And we know that there are at least, it's small, but at least some people on earth who have done this. If you guys aren't familiar, a great book is called Born to Run, and it's about the Tarahumara Indians, and they've been known to run marathons, ironically, eating almost nothing, drinking almost nothing. And I believe they're in northwestern Mexico. And I think there's over 100,000 people in that tribe, if you'll call it that at this point. So it shows that it can be done. I don't know of anyone else on this earth that's doing that, that's not a part of modern society. But yeah, maybe we're missing the mark. So great point, man. All right. With that said, where can people support you? Because like you said, you're trying to raise awareness here, and then you can get donations as a result of that. So where would they be able to find you if they just want to follow you, support you, or perhaps even donate to the challenge itself?
Yeah, so the best place to go for the challenge is Zero-Two-Lomond.com. So I'm sure we can add this in the show notes.
Yep.
So that gives an overview of kind of why, the stories of both of us. And through that, then, as well as awareness, we are supporting some really great charities. So the Charlie Foundation for Ketogenic Therapies, Macmillan Cancer Support, Chris Palmer's Brain Energy Fund, as well as Dr. Richard Johnson's Research Institute into the impacts of sugar and fructose. So they're four great causes we're looking to raise awareness from. So that's really around the challenge. People are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably I'm not too I'm not on. I would say I need to get on the other social media platforms, which I will do at some point. But having been mostly anti-social media for the last 10 years, I'm now realizing the huge benefits that social media. It's a double-edged sword, but LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me.
I feel you, man. It's kind of ironic because I do a lot of social stuff for FTN, but then the truth of the matter is my social sucks. So like you got to do it in the best way, but then you got to balance that for sure. One of the last things I'll ask today is, again, we've never done this before, so our guest will be back tomorrow, but you will be accompanied by some people. And quite frankly, I think you could probably tease this better than I could. So could you give us a little preview or a trailer, if you will, of what we will be back talking about tomorrow? Because this is more connected to how I met you, because I met you at Hack Your Health 2024 just about a month or two ago. First of all, great event. Shout out to Robin. We always shout her out. We absolutely love her. Looking forward to 2025 in Tampa. I believe they're doing it. So what will we be talking about tomorrow, and who will we be talking with?
Yeah, certainly. So happy to. So tomorrow we will be talking. The title of the podcast is allulose nature's GLP-1? And so I'm sure everyone is familiar with GLP-1s and a lot of the weight loss drugs that are out there on the market. And allulose is a rare, amazing natural sugar, which a lot of the scientific research, which we'll dig into tomorrow, actually demonstrates a lot of health benefits, to allulose. So so we'll be digging into that with Dr. Richard Johnson, who wrote an amazing book. So Born to Run is one of my favorite books. Probably, of course, one of my other favorite books actually is Dr. Richard Johnson's Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. And that was actually one of the seminal things that I read that really blew my mind, of this kind of the fructose pathway in our body called the polyol pathway, and how this has saved us as a species, because in times of food scarcity, our bodies actually utilize the fructose pathway to disrupt mitochondria and promote energy storage. So when we have calorie surplus through sugars, through carbohydrates, and Dr. Johnson will do a much better job than me tomorrow. Certainly, salt, dehydration, alcohol, all these things, our bodies can actually create its own fructose internally, and it does so specifically as a survival mechanism. So an amazing book, with the parallels with nature, and how bears will eat lots of honey, just before they hibernate, but for the rest of the year, they maintain a healthy weight. And they do that to store enough fat as energy to see them through hibernation. So Dr. Richard Johnson will talk around the science of allulose, and then Dr. Charles Carvo runs an amazing weight loss practice called Pounds Transformation that over the last 5 years have helped over 3,000 people naturally lose weight and reverse diseases using allulose. And RX Sugar is the kind of the company that he partners with that I now work for, that produce allulose-based products to, again, really kind of help people be able to have the, these kind of, touch the sweet cravings, but without the really kind of metabolic dysfunction that traditional sugar provides. And so we'll dig into a lot of Dr. Carlo's work of working with over 3,000 people over the last 5 years, helping them to kind of naturally lose weight using allulose. So we think that allulose could well be nature's GLP-1. And so, yeah, excited to join Dr. Johnson and Dr. Carlo on the podcast with you tomorrow.
Well, Neil, you're a great guest, so I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, and that'll be fun. I definitely, it's almost tough, admittedly, sometimes being in this space in the way that you can be as a podcast host, because there's so many topics and there's so many things that, I don't know if we've ever even brought up the word allulose, which is amazing. I'm sure we have maybe once or twice, but because you're focused on so much other stuff, it's like this is an ingredient that's being used widely now, so I'd love to know more about it. And certainly I've seen RX Sugar in stores everywhere, so I can't wait for that. Best of luck to you on your challenge. I will probably wish you luck tomorrow as well. I'll be saying a prayer here too. Make sure you get through there. I thank God you have a safety boat following you, not because I don't think you're going to finish it, just because always good to dot the I's and cross the T's, right? So thank you so much for coming on today and just giving us an inspirational story, right? I think the lesson here, especially from the beginning, is don't stop if you don't have to. And even if you do stop, man, you can go from being not able to play 30 seconds of American, soccer or football with your daughter to be doing something that, again, quite possibly no human being has ever done before, except you two are about to do. So absolutely amazing. And we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks very much for hosting me. I've really enjoyed the discussion and look forward